Open up your Bibles, if you would, to Matthew chapter 6. If you're still learning your way around the Bible, it's divided into two categories, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Matthew's in the New Testament. It's the very first book of the New Testament. I know some people say, who was Matthew? Well, he was actually a Jesus follower. He started out as a tax collector, and that they were despised by their people in those days. And then he became a Jesus follower, and here he is, the author of one of the Gospels, one of the historical references of Jesus. And so, talk about a changed story. It's pretty cool. Well, the last few weeks we've talked about, one of the things we learned from superheroes is that they have a gift. And when they're not using their gift, they're just kind of ordinary and common. And there's not anything recognizable. But the minute they recognize their gift and they begin to use it to serve others, then it takes them to a whole new level that all of a sudden the ordinary becomes extraordinary. And the same thing is true with you and I when we recognize what God has entrusted us with, the gift that He's given us, and that takes place. And then last week, we talked about how, like Batman has his Batcave, Superman has his Fortress of Solitude, that we need a place that we retreat to, that we need to be alone with God, that secret place that we go into, and He begins to speak to our heart, and He begins to refresh us and do things with us. Well, today we're going to talk about being the unmasked anonymous, that one of the reasons why they wear masks is because they don't care who gets the credit. And for most of us, that really flies in the face of how we live our lives, of who we are from the day that we were born. I wasn't there probably for your birth, but one of the first things that you did when you came out was you began making noise, probably. And so don't look at me like that. That's probably true. And so, and people began to notice us and that type of thing. And yet as Christians, and we'll talk about this later, that, who we're called to draw attention to is somebody completely different than ourselves. And so in Matthew chapter 6 is where we'll begin. And Jesus said here in verse 1, He said, watch out. Everybody say, watch out. So this is a warning. In other words, He's letting us know, be aware of this. It's something that we could be susceptible to. That'd be something that, that it's something I could be in trouble of doing. And so He said, watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly. Now, a lot of people just read that and they stop right there and say, well, I should never do anything in public. No. There's more to this than what He's saying. The issue is not doing it publicly. It's why we're doing it publicly. So He said, don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others. In other words, if the sole reason why I'm doing this is so other people look at me and go, that guy right there, he's pretty incredible. And I go, yes, I am. And I mean, when that's our response, when that's our desire, when we're just trying to draw attention to ourselves, that's the wrong reason. He said, don't do it so that we'll be noticed, so we'll be admired, and people will just be like, you, man, you're the real deal. Thank you for noticing. I mean, that's when we have that response and we've missed it. So He said, don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. In other words, there's something that God wants to do for us as we do things strictly for Him. He goes on to say, when you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do. Well, what do? They blow trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything. Everybody say everything. Now, a lot of times we use this phrase, and it's kind of scary. If I said God sees everything, or if you said, hey, Rick, I want you to know God sees everything, you're like, man, quit reminding me. I would be... Because there's things I know that I do that I'm like, I wish that it'd be one of two things. Either A, I wish I wouldn't do it, or B, I wish He wouldn't see it. And so the better bet is that I just not do it. But also, when we say that He sees everything, that's not always a negative thing, right? Right? I mean, when He sees everything, it means the things that we do, the sacrifices we make that nobody else sees, He sees. So it says that our Father who sees everything will reward you. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I tell you the truth, that is all the reward they will ever get. But when you pray, go away by yourself. Everybody say by yourself. Shut the door behind you and pray to your Father in private. Then your Father who sees everything, there's that word again, will reward you. So Jesus here is talking about a couple things. First of all, He's talking about the reward that we get. Where is our reward coming from? Well, it comes down to this, whoever we're doing it for. If I'm doing it for you, then I should expect my reward to come from you. Now, the problem is that sometimes you don't appreciate what I do. Have you ever felt unappreciated before? Anybody in here? How many of you have ever felt unappreciated? Man, some of you folks do really good. Now, you're around people that appreciate you all the time. You need to hang out with the rest of us. We hang out with some people that don't appreciate us. But I mean, we all have those moments where we feel unappreciated, unvalued. People they're not grateful for what we do. And it's just real easy for that to offend us and to wound us and to hurt us. And sometimes people will even pull back and they withdraw from serving because they felt unvalued. I think about my own dad. My dad was a very good dad, and I love him, man. I mean, when I was little, he was just faithful to serve in church. I would just watch him every week go serve. But and the pastor that was there was one of his very good friends, and it was a denomination. And they were good people, but there were just some issues that arose. And so the denomination headquarters felt it was best to move the pastor from this church to this church. He was incredibly hurt by that. And then the next pastor that came in, was trying to get other people involved, which he should have. And somewhere along the way, my dad got wounded by that, and he was never the same. He was never the same. And in his, he still had a love for the Lord, but as far as serving in the church, that commitment that he had, that level of just doing things behind the scenes, he just stepped back because of the wound that he had. And I wish he'd have just grabbed hold of this. He had so much more purpose left, so much more to give left. And so many times, when we do things and we have, looking to somebody else for the reason, we can become offended and hurt. But he said, your Father sees everything, will reward you. So here's 2 questions to ask anytime I do something good, anytime I serve, anytime I give, anytime I pray. Here's the first question, and that's this. Who did I do this for? Who did I do this for? I'm sure if you serve for any period of time, that you've dealt with a situation where that thought comes, man, I've given all this time and nobody appreciates it. Man, I said no to this, this, and this, and said yes to this. And the people that I said yes to, they don't value it. And the people that I said no to are mad to me for saying no to it. And they just feel so unappreciated. And we can just deal with this wound and this pain. But the truth of the matter is that we have to step back and say, wait a minute, who did I do this for? My Father sees everything. Your Father sees everything. And so He sees it. And when we do it for Him, then there's a reward from Him. So the first question is, who did I do this for? And the second question is, what do I want from it? Well, if I want your appreciation, then really that kind of answers the question of who I did it for. Right? If I'm mad because you didn't value it, then I can say all day long, well, I really did it for God, but the fact that I'm mad at you because you didn't value it tells a different story. Now, I'm not throwing any rocks at you because, man, I've been there. Probably, maybe more than you. Maybe some of you don't struggle with this at all, but I've been there at times where it's like, man, I can't, I did this and I can't believe that I had this happen and, why would they treat me that way? And man, there's just this real ache, this real thing of like, it stinks if our hearts aren't in the right place when we feel unappreciated. We feel like people that should value us don't value us. And I've got to think that we've all been there. I know I have. We have to step back and say, who am I doing this for? And does it matter to Him? Yes, it does. Well, then I have to change what I want to see take place out of this. Then instead of hoping you notice, that I'm grateful that He notices it. Instead of hoping that you'll do something, that I'm grateful that He has a reward, that there's something He's going to do as a result of this, that He'll reward that because He sees in secret. He even talks about prayer right here, that in this right here, He says to shut your door. He said, but when you pray, go away by yourself and shut the door behind you. That, language kind of progresses. And like in the King James, they use the word closet. And so back then, initially the word that was used there for closet, it meant a place that you hide your valuables. That things that were precious, that they were very secret to you, that you would stow them away in this place. They weren't just for everybody's viewing. They weren't just for everybody's knowledge. It was very precious to you. And then as language went on, then that word went from being a place that we kind of hide our precious things, that it became a place that was kind of a stronghold that nobody could break into. But then even as time went on, then the language even changed from that to like, it wasn't just a closet, it was like a bedroom, which was a very sacred kind of intimate place. I mean, you think about when we have people come over, they may sit down in our living room, hang out in the kitchen, but it's not like, hey, let's all go hang out in our bedroom together. If you do that, don't invite me over to your house. It's really uncomfortable for me, okay? But, and so we have to understand this, that in that place, that's a very limited audience, very limited access, where very secret, intimate, private conversations take place. And he said, when we're praying and our reason is not to be seen, but because there's one in secret, that's where the real relationship develops, because I'm not doing it for you. And when I give, it's out of gratitude for how good He's been. And He sees my reason. Motives are they're just such a funny thing, because the truth of the matter is only God and the person doing it know what their reason is. And it's so easy to sit back and just make judgments on people. And one of the reasons why we're not supposed to judge each other, because God looks at their heart. I've done things before, and looking back on it, it was the wrong thing, but my reason was right. Haven't you? Haven't you wanted to do the right thing, but not really known what that is in that moment? And you make that decision, and you look back, and the fruit of it is like, oh man, I should have done better. But I didn't know better. I was doing what I knew to do, and I was trying to do the right thing. And then there have been other times where what I did looked exactly right, but my motives were horrible. Horrible. Well, God sees through all of that. And so He's looking at my reasons. And whereas sometimes we want to step back and stand in judgment of I can't believe they did that. You don't know what they've been through. You don't know what decisions. You don't know what put them in that place. And had you been in their situation, you may not have done as well. I may not have done as well as what they did. God sees. He sees that, and He knows this, that if our heart is right, that it's like a compass, even though that sometimes we may get kind of knocked off course a little bit, that it will just stay on path, stay on course, that He'll direct us to the right place, that as we grow and our understanding grows, because our motives are right, our compass is on course, and we end up in the right place. But so many times we do things and we're looking to somebody else for appreciation, somebody else for value. And the truth of the matter is, when we look to God, we have to understand that we look to Him and we're like, Lord, I'm doing this for you. That He sees it all. He sees the struggle. He sees the challenge. He sees it all. And so He sees the value and He sees the sacrifice. And so this is what I have to understand. Number one is this: who we do it for will determine who we get it from. If I do it for you, then I should be expecting my reward from you. And the problem is that sometimes you don't always appreciate it. You don't always know. If you do it for me, the problem is I don't always know. Sometimes I forget. But if you do it for Him, then whether I acknowledge you the way that I should, whether they acknowledge you the way because you've done it for Him, then you have confidence knowing that your reward will come from Him. That's where it's coming from. That's where I'm looking. God, I know that you see. So number one is this: is who we do it for will determine who we get it from. Look at number two, if you would go with me to Hebrews chapter 6. Hebrews chapter 6. You're in the New Testament. Hebrews is in the New Testament. It's like several books over. It's past Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts. Keep going. Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Keep going. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Keep going. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. 1st and 2nd Timothy. Keep going. Titus, Philemon. And then Hebrews. If you get to James, you went too far. Hebrews 6, verse 9. Now, Hebrews was actually a letter that was written to Jewish Christians, that they were undergoing a lot of pressure, a lot of persecution, and they were like family members were shunning them, and they were being pressured to denounce their faith. And so over and over again, the writer of Hebrews is saying, hey, don't quit, don't give up, persevere, don't cast away your confidence. With faith and patience, you'll inherit the promises. And so in Hebrews 6, he just got through talking about people that had walked away, that had backed away, that had turned their back on the faith, and what that would mean to them. And so in verse 9, he says this: dear friends, even though we're talking this way, we really don't believe it applies to you. In other words, we know you're not going to quit. That in spite of how hard it gets, no matter how tough it's been, no matter what's happened to you, no matter what's being said about you, we know you're not going to quit. We believe we are confident that you are meant for better things, things that come with salvation. Now listen to this. For God is not unjust. Everybody say this. Say, God is not unjust. He will not forget. Say, He will not forget how hard you have worked for Him. So God's not unjust. He won't forget how hard you've worked for Him. Now listen to this. And how you have shown your love to Him. See? So He won't forget how hard you've worked and how you've shown your love to Him. Well, how do I show my love to Him? Is it by bringing a really big Bible to work? Well, you could do that, but I've seen people carry big Bibles that are kind of mean. By praying over my meal, I think that's a good thing to pray over your meal, but I've seen people that religiously pray, and they're just as ugly as can be. And I'm not talking about physically. Well, how did He say we could show our love for Him? Show your love for Him. He will not forget how hard you have worked for Him and how you've shown your love to Him by caring for other believers. You've shown you love Him by being good to other people. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Because I just love, you love me? Well, I do, but I love God. He's not unjust. He sees what you've put up with. He sees what you've endured. He sees the number of times that you've done, that you've forgiven. He sees that. He sees, that in that place that you're at, that how you're not valued, the sacrifices that you've made. He sees that. He's not indifferent to it. He's not unaware of it. It's one of those things that He sees it. He sees, He will not forget how hard you've worked for Him and how you have shown your love to Him by caring for other believers as you still do. Our great desire is that you will keep on loving others as long as life lasts in order to make certain that what you hope for will come true. So, when you're tempted to feel unappreciated and unnoticed, and again, as I said before, for some people, that's created a wound in them that's caused them to go, I'm done. I'm not serving there anymore. I'm not doing that for people anymore. I'm not being a part of that. And just He sees He sees how over and over again you've served and not been appreciated, been promoted over. He sees it. And He is not unjust. One translation puts it this way, that He will not overlook it or fail. He will not fail to remember. God sees, He sees the sacrifice you've made. It's so easy sometimes, right, to go through life and people just don't realize what we've done. Not this past Christmas, but the Christmas before last. One thing about Jake and Ashley, Ashley's our daughter, Jake's the worship leader is my son-in-law. But one of the things they do for Christmas is that a lot of times they'll pick out just a special thing we're going to do for somebody. And so not this past Christmas, but last Christmas, I'm sitting there, everybody's gotten their presents. And I don't want to say I'm old, but I'm certainly older because I'm at that place now where I like watching, the kids open up their stuff and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, hey, this is cool. My dad used to do that, and I'm like, he really doesn't mean that. He wants stuff. But it was cool. I mean, it was good, and I was glad. But after they hand out everything, then she gives me this package. It's kind of this long package. It's kind of flimsy or whatever. I'm like, this is kind of weird. And so I open it up, and it's a rose. And I'm like, okay. And she goes, you like roses, don't you? And I'm like, now will I lose man points if I'm like, yeah, they're kind of cool. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, yeah. She goes, well, how about rose bowls? Do you like rose bowls? I'm like, now you're talking my language. Now, we can have a conversation now. And they'd got me a ticket to the OU Georgia game at the Rose Bowl. And so it was the coolest thing, man. I mean, all that kind of stuff. And so I went out there and I watched the game. And it was an incredible game except for the last play of the game. The last play of the game was the stupidest play in the world. And so I hated it. But everything else about it was good. And so I'm sitting there just kind of in the stadium, just kind of choking back the tears, and like, stinking cheaters, just and so as I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden this thought comes across my mind. I'm like, I know my son-in-law and my daughter. I know they don't have this huge pile of money sitting around. They're trying to get by, and he works here at the church, and she has a cookie business that she does, and so I know that in order for them to do this, they had to say no to lots of stuff. She had to make extra cookies. There are things they did without. And in the moment of that situation, that slight disappointment that the outcome wasn't what I thought it would be, the value of that gift went up just as I thought about the sacrifices they'd made, the things they'd said no to. And forever, that gift will be a precious memory, not because the outcome was what I wanted it to be, but because I know of the sacrifice that went on behind the scenes to make it happen. Now, I was fortunate enough to know that situation, but sometimes we do things for people like that, and they either have no awareness or they're just not mature enough to get it. And those are the times it can be really painful because you have said no to things in order to make that happen. And you may be feeling that way right now about certain things in your life. Maybe with family members, maybe with coworkers, maybe with friends. Maybe you've experienced it at the church, maybe from me. Man, if it's from me, I'm so sorry. But in spite of every person's frailty around you, I want you to know that God sees. And He will not fail to remember what you've done, the sacrifices you've made. And so whether anybody else sees it or not, it's not blind to Him. He's not indifferent to it. His eyes are open to the success and to the sacrifice and to the things that you've done to make it happen. Number two is this, is that no matter how unnoticed we may feel, our service does not escape the eye of the one who matters. Really, we embrace these things to understand this, that, just like, we say that what we learned from superhero, they wear masks so they don't get any credit for who they are, for what they've done. I wonder if in reality, if we approach everything from this standpoint, like, I don't want to be noticed. I don't want to get the credit. How would that affect our desire to serve? How would that affect that, that it's like, I'm going here, I want to be as anonymous as possible. And again, if you're not anonymous, that doesn't make you a failure, because it still comes down to, why are you doing this? It still comes down to, why am I doing this? Rick, why are you doing this? Is it so people will just like you? Or is it because you genuinely have a love for God and you know that He wants to reach into this person's world? So number two is this: no matter how unnoticed we may feel, our service does not escape the eyes of the one who matters. Let's look at this last one. Go with me back, if you would, to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Again, you were Matthew 6 a few minutes ago. Matthew 5, verse 13. Now, I love this whole passage right here that Jesus is talking about, because again, if you put it in context, like who He's talking to, He's dealing with people that the word that we use a lot today is the word disenfranchised, and we say that a lot of times, and that we keep using that word, and I'm not sure it means what you think it means. So, but here's the thing, is that these people genuinely were. They had no political influence. They had no social influence. They had no economic power. They had, they were in a land that was occupied by a foreign power. They had no voting. I mean, it was, you talk about really being disconnected, disenfranchised. It would be easy to think that what you do doesn't matter. And yet Jesus told them right here, He said this in verse 13, hey, you're the salt of the earth. You may not have the ability to do all these other things, but regardless, you can make a difference where you are. You can influence things. He said, you're the salt of the earth, but what good is salt if it's lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. Then He said this, you are the light of the world. In other words, you may feel hidden, but your light is seen. You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. Now listen to this. In the same way, let your good deeds shine. Everybody say, let your good deeds shine. Now this almost feels like a contradiction to what He's going to say later when He says, don't do it in front of people. But He went on to say, don't do it in front of people to be seen by them. In other words, don't do it so that they'll see you doing it. Right here He says, let your good deeds shine, but there's a reason why He wants us to let them shine. Let your good deeds shine out for all to see. Why? So that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. In other words, that if we're going to do it so people can see, then listen to this. It should always point back to Jesus. That when people leave that He uses our gift, that we use our gift so they can have an encounter with God. That I'm doing this so you can experience what He's like. So you can experience Him. And so that we let our good deeds shine so they see Him. That we do it not so we'll be seen, but so He'll be seen. Our desire is, our hope is that when they leave, that they're not talking about us. They're not talking about who we are, what we're doing. A few weeks ago, I had somebody come to me at the door, and we were talking, and they said, I haven't gone to church much, but they said, man, when you started talking, it's like this presence came on me. And it was like just this love just kind of wrapped itself around me. And I'm sitting looking, man, this is so cool. And then they said something that was incredibly humbling. They go, I don't remember what you were talking about. And I'm like, there's probably a lot of people who would say the same thing in there. That's pretty humbling. It was like, yeah, you were talking, but it had nothing to do with you. Thank you. But that's the way it's supposed to be, right? Isn't that the way it's supposed to be? Is that it's not about me. Shouldn't be. You say, do you ever make it about you? I do, man. In my immaturity and in my insecurity, I get my feelings hurt sometimes. Feel unappreciated. I'm never doing that for you again. That's pretty Christian. Now, you mind your own business. But we do, right? I mean, we take it very personally, and yet we're called to reflect Him. And all. You and I were made to be image bearers, to bear His image in everything that we do, to reflect Him in how we respond. And how we respond to disappointment, how we respond to these other things, that in that situation, in that moment, to reflect who He is. There's a strength with it. There's a love with it. There's a selflessness with it. But it's to reflect Him that if we're doing it right, then one reason why, if we don't get appreciated like we probably should, then we're okay with it because I'm not doing it for me. Because I love Him, I'm doing it for you. And besides, if I'm really doing it right, it's not about drawing attention to me. It's so that when you leave this moment, you leave this event, this thing that's taken place, this experience, that you leave and your encounter has not been with me as a human being, but your encounter has been with somebody that in their brokenness was rescued by Jesus. And the only way I know to express gratitude is by loving who He loves. And you're introduced to Him through that. Jesus is looking at just this group of people. And He's just having this conversation. He's like, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your Heavenly Father. So everyone will know about Him and about His goodness and who He is. And it changes it for me. And I wish I could tell you that I instinctively do this. Sometimes I have to remind myself, look, dude, it's not about you. Hey, you quit feeling sorry for yourself. Hey, you need to do this. Yeah, this isn't fair, God. For who? That there's just something about that that's just so healthy when it's like, my life's just not mine. Or it's yours. It's all I have to give you, and you don't need it. I don't lay my life down to Him because He needs it. I lay my life down to Him because I'm grateful. It's the one thing I have to give Him. That I can say, this is yours. And let me have an attitude that's right as I go in. Let my mindset be right. And again, I'll tell you, I think we're alike. Maybe you're past this, I don't know, but I still struggle with it at times. They can't be about me. I can't make it about who I am. Sometimes, just like anybody else, I get my feelings hurt, feel unappreciated. But man, the devil just uses that to get us to withdraw from what God's called us to do. Some of you may be here right now that you may look in your walk, in your past, you have some things that you've done that are just great things. But because you were wounded and in church or maybe in your job or at school or in the community that you've just kind of withdrawn yourself and now people don't get to experience the benefit of your gift and what you do? Because somewhere along the line you weren't valued as you should have been. But the way that you take away the power of the enemy's weapon to offend you with that is you remind yourself, this isn't about me anyway. So whether or not you ever appreciate me, I still need to do it because I love Him. I don't know about you, man. I have to tell myself that sometimes. And sometimes it takes me a little while. I wish I could tell you I just get over it. But I know if we don't get over it, then the alternative is that we just like, I'm not going to expose myself anymore. I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm not going to risk being hurt. Some of you have withdrawn, and people think that they have all sorts of judgments they make on you and things about you, and that they only knew that the reason why is because somewhere along the line the enemy tricked you into being hurt. He tricked you into being wounded, and you withdraw not because you're a bad person, but you're around people that in their brokenness, they couldn't value you. So now you're afraid to love anybody. Be good to anybody. Because you may experience that again. Can I remove the mystery? You will. You will experience it again. Because people, we're broken. That's why we need Jesus. But when we step away and it becomes an act of worship, and it's like, it's not about me, it's not even really about them. Father, this is about you. And they matter to you. And so you want to reveal to them their value, their worth, and they may not be at a place yet where they even recognize it, but I'm just so grateful that whether they do or not, I'm yours. My life, it's not much. It's what I have. It's yours. Every mistake, every flaw, every shortcoming, everything that's ever people have looked at and spoken judgment over me for whatever reason, but even the ugly parts of me, that as you forgive me, it's all yours. So then we lay ourselves down and we go through life, and we have to remind ourselves from time to time. And the truth of the matter is, I know in my own life that there are times that I don't appreciate what people do, and sometimes because we don't know the sacrifice they've made for us. But if we'll have that mindset of, it's okay if I'm anonymous. It's okay if I'm unknown. It's okay if I'm unappreciated. Because I'm not looking to you for my reward. He's not unjust. He won't fail to remember. I forget sometimes. He always remembers. And so when I go into it, my goal should be not, hey, please notice me, hey, please see me. My goal should be, Father, I want to show them just a taste, a glimpse of what you're like. That's when it changes everything. And it does become an act of worship. It's precious. And sometimes it's not even recognized till the other side, till we leave this place. I wonder what that'll be like. You stand before Him and He says, down there where you felt like you weren't appreciated and people didn't know what you'd given up, I saw it. I saw it. And then the reward that He gives you will be incredible. I don't know about you, have to be reminded about that sometimes. I want us to do this. I want us to bow our heads and close our eyes and just spend a moment with God. And for some of us, man, it could be just a reminder to just